Hello everyone and welcome back to LewisFiction, and welcome to What If the DCEU Had the Structure of the Marvel Cinematic Universe? This is a question I imagine many of you have pondered over the years. Well, I'm here to give my take on it. I'm going to try and create as many parallels between Marvel and DC characters and stories as much as possible to try and keep the idea of following the structure of the Marvel Cinematic Universe as intact as possible. Without further ado, let's get into our first film, which will be releasing in 2008, which will be Batman. This will be an origin story for Bruce Wayne, and Mr. Freeze will actually be the villain, so changing it up a little bit from other origin stories of Batman. This origin will follow Bruce Wayne as his journey to becoming Batman we all know today is paralleled also by Mr. Freeze's downfall. Yes, this story will take a lot of inspiration and will adapt the famous story Batman Snow. A lot of references are also made to Ra's al Ghul and the League of Assassins, as they will be characters that will be popping up later in the universe. The next film, also releasing in 2008, will be Aquaman. We will introduce the whole of Atlantis and also the whole hierarchy around Atlantis as well. Black Manta will be the main villain, as we also tease the Amazons and Themyscira at the end of this film as well, hinting at a potential Wonder Woman movie. The next movie in the first phase of this reformed DCEU is Batman the Man Who Laughs, similar to how Iron Man got 2 films in phase 1 as well. This will be simple. The Joker is the villain, and we follow the classic story of how the Joker is a natural repercussion of Batman's rise. Joker represents everything wrong with Gotham and also the pieces of Batman that are tucked away. The post-credit scene of this film will be Batman finding out more about other heroes in the universe such as Aquaman and Wonder Woman, potentially teasing a future crossover movie. The next film, paralleling Thor, will be Wonder Woman, coming out in 2011. I don't have much to say on this film, as I imagine it would be very similar to the actual Wonder Woman movie that came out in 2017 in the actual DC extended universe. I imagine, however, to connect it to this larger universe, this film will also reference the tensions between Atlantis, and I imagine Aquaman will also appear at the end of this film, as everything starts coming together, starting to see a cinematic universe form. The next film in this phase, of course, releasing also in 2011 and the precursor to the first team-up movie, will be Superman. This, of course, will be just introducing Clark Kent, Superman's origin story. We've seen it in a million shows, a million movies, and a million comic books before. We all know what would happen in this film. However, one thing that I do want to add is that I'm a very big fan of My Adventures with Superman, so my ideal Superman film, I imagine, would take a lot of the dynamic between Lois, Clark, and Jimmy and would probably apply it to this film. And to finally round out phase 1, of course, we have the first team-up movie, which is Justice League. Now, I decided to go a little bit left field with this Justice League team-up movie and do something that I've not seen many people suggest before, and that is introduce the supervillain Professor Ivo, who creates a villain called Amazo to harness the powers of rising superheroes. The story that I'm adapting from here was one of the more earliest stories in the Justice League's history, and I imagine this being the first villain that they face because it just makes sense for the universe. In this film, Professor Ivo wants to harness all of the powers of the upcoming and rising superheroes, with Superman being the catalyst for the plan. Ivo is actually afraid that if Superman was to turn bad, they'd need a way to stop him. He'd seen the likes of Aquaman, Wonder Woman, and even Batman, but none of them scared him as much as Superman. And Amazo doesn't just stop at Superman, which causes all of the heroes in the universe to team up to help each other, forming, of course, the Justice League. This film would also introduce other characters as well, such as Green Arrow and the Atom, who will also be characters that will be taken by Amazo under Professor Ivo's plan. Either way, the Justice League teams up and ends up defeating him. Moving into phase 2, we of course move into the third Batman film, which is Batman: The Court of Owls. The Court of Owls is a very special Batman story, and I imagine he would be quite far into his career at this point in the cinematic universe for this story to work. However, another massive part of this story and this film will also be revealing that Batman is making contingency plans against the Justice League in fear that any of them turn rogue, which actually, very ironically, is paralleling what Professor Ivo did in the first Justice League movie, which exposes Batman's current ideological fears. We then move to later on in 2013 when the second film of phase 2 releases, which is Wonder Woman: Rise of the Cheetah. Once again, not much to say about this film other than it will follow the Cheetah as the main villain and would probably follow the rebirth version of that story. The next film in Phase 2 and coming out in 2014 will be Superman and the Lost Daughter of Krypton. This film follows Superman after the events of the first Justice League movie and deals with the repercussions of that film. It will also introduce, of course, as the title suggests, Kara, and will focus on Clark and Kara's relationship and how she ends up becoming Supergirl. Her integration into society will be a massive part of the movie as well. The next film, also releasing in 2014, will be Suicide Squad Volume 1. I imagine it plays out very similar to the James Gunn film that actually came out in the DCEU. And because obviously James Gunn directed the direct parallel to this, which is of course Guardians of the Galaxy, I don't think I really need to say much more other than the parallels are very similar, that it really does speak for itself. The next film in Phase 2, releasing in 2015, is of course the next team-up film, which is Justice League Tower of Babel. Now, if you guys put the pieces together with Ra's al Ghul and Batman creating contingencies, then you knew exactly where this was going to go. And also following the parallels between the MCU and the Civil War story, then this story for the DC heroes just makes so much sense. Ra's al Ghul comes into possession of the contingencies that Batman created so he can take out the League. This is then exposed to the League and tension rises between Batman and the other heroes. This film will also introduce Hawkman and Hawkgirl, similar to how Avengers Age of Ultron introduced Wanda and Quicksilver. However, just like Age of Ultron, Hawkman will die during the final battle, adding consequences to Batman's actions. The next film in 2015 will be The Flash. This will just be a classic origin story for Barry Allen. The Reverse Flash will be the main villain, and mainly I imagine this film being a little bit more light-hearted than the rest of the universe, which is why I decided to parallel The Flash with Ant-Man in this structuring video. A major part of the Flash movie will be focusing on Iris and Barry's relationship, as this film will have a more human element to it than the other films in Phase 2. Kicking off Phase 3 in 2016, we have, of course, Superman Injustice. Paralleling the Civil War story for the MCU, Superman Injustice will follow on from the previous tensions of the other Justice League film, which will be loosely adapting the Injustice story. However, Superman in this version of course doesn't go bonkers. Instead, it's actually the League believing Batman to be a danger to their survival and want him banished from the League altogether. And some even want him to retire from being a vigilante altogether. Hawkgirl is actually one of the many characters that is actually completely behind this, since of course Hawkman was a direct consequence of Batman's actions in the last League film. Superman tries to reason with them, but it causes a full brawl. This film follows Superman as he is the one stuck in the middle of the conflict. One of DC's characters with the biggest moral and ethical compass is of course Clark Kent, so I imagine seeing this film from his eyes would probably be the best bet. And of course that parallels very nicely to the MCU, as obviously Civil War was told through a Captain America story. Dick Grayson is also introduced in this film as well, and for those of you who are saying, oh, there's probably no room for Dick Grayson to be introduced to this film, there is actually a very good reason for it. Dick Grayson in this film represents the humanity of Bruce Wayne, as Bruce during this movie is very closed off and isolated, but Dick brings out the best in him. He eventually goes on to become Robin during the end of the movie. This is also the Flash's first interaction with the League as well. The film actually ends with the League falling apart, paralleling once again Captain America Civil War and the Avengers falling apart at the end of that movie. The next film in Phase 3, which will also release in 2016, Green Lantern Corps. We obviously will introduce Hal Jordan, and this will be an origin story for that character. And of course, Sinestro will be the main villain. Moving to 2017, and of course we get Suicide Squad Volume 2. Not much really needs to be said about this film, just as I mentioned about the first, as everything I did mention about the first one also applies here. However, I do imagine that this story would be a fun spin on the Doom Patrol crossover, where Task Force X have to kill Hawk, only to be intercepted by the Doom Patrol. I imagine it could be quite comedic, it could be kind of like a buddy cop kind of heist chase movie. I've just got that vibe in my head. I think this movie would be pretty cool. The next film, of course, releasing in 2017, paralleling Spider-Man Homecoming, if you haven't guessed, is Nightwing. This story will advance Dick Grayson's story as Robin into Nightwing. It will feature Batman throughout, just as Tony Stark featured throughout Spider-Man Homecoming, and it will also focus on the coming of age of Dick Grayson. Next up is Wonder Woman Paradise Lost. Following on from Nightwing nicely, we follow Diana Prince as Bruce Wayne calls her for the last line of defense against Greek gods that threaten Gotham City. This could be a cool way to see some of the older rogues from maybe phases 1 and 2 come back to reprise their roles, but obviously they are being used as host by the Greek gods. Diana's willingness to help Bruce also restores faith that maybe that relationship isn't as damaged as it first initially seemed. And then moving on to 2018, we are getting ever closer to the final team up. The first film releasing in this year will be none other than Aquaman War for Atlantis. Paralleling Black Panther, this sequel follows Marius, also known as Ocean Master, who returns to Atlantis after being exiled a long time ago to reclaim his place on the throne. Of course, he is evil, and this parallels obviously Killmonger in the Black Panther movie. Aquaman eventually takes him down, as of course T'Challa did in the actual Black Panther movie in the MCU. And that of course brings us onto the team-up movie, also releasing in 2018, which of course is Justice League Final Crisis Part 1. The JLA of course will face off against Darkseid as he discovers the anti-life equation. The Justice League will lose at the end of this film, as everyone saw coming. However, it actually ends with a massive twist. The Flash actually ends up reversing everything to try and save everyone in a last-ditch effort to save the day. And this then leads us on to the next film in Phase 3 and the final movie in 2018, paralleling Ant-Man and the Wasp, which will be the Flashpoint Paradox. While Barry, who is still quite inexperienced at this point, tried to undo Darkseid's reign and accidentally slingshots himself into this universe's version of the Flashpoint Paradox. Barry thinks he's saved everyone until things are actually much worse in this new timeline. Atlantis is going against the Amazons, Thomas Wayne is Batman, etc., and a bunch of other things are wrong with this new timeline. Barry returns to how things are, and of course he has to now figure out a new way to save everyone else. This then leads us on to the first movie in 2019, which will be Shazam. This film is an origin story for Shazam and will follow him before the events of Final Crisis. I imagine this will be very similar to the actual first Shazam film, so I don't think I need to say much more on it here. And of course that leads us onto the final part of this whole entire saga, which of course is Justice League Final Crisis Part 2, which is just the team eventually recuperates and ends up finding a way to beat Darkseid, saving the day eventually, just as the heroes did in Avengers Endgame in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Of course, then moving on to Phase 4, you could make loads of comparisons to the projects that came out then. For example, there'd be maybe a Hawkgirl show in the place of WandaVision. You could maybe have some kind of Robin and Superboy show for Falcon and the Winter Soldier, or maybe a Supergirl show, you don't know. And of course, the big one that I think everyone will point out is that I guess Crisis on Infinite Earths would obviously be the direct parallel to Avengers Secret Wars. But do let me know if you want a part 2 to this video where I possibly explore phases 4, 5, and even 6 of the MCU structure, and listing out some of the projects that I probably would put in there. I also do want to apologize. Obviously, I'm not as big of a DC fan as I am a Marvel fan, so if I did get a few things wrong, potentially, then I am truly sorry. I tried my hardest with this video because you guys requested it, so I really wanted to give it to you guys, and I do love DC as well, just not as much as Marvel, so if I missed a few things, continuity errors, etc., then that's why. But either way, thank you guys for watching. I'll catch you guys all in the next video. Take care, and peace.